Just like we had special cases when we were multiplying by decimals, we also have special cases as we're dividing by decimals. So we're going to look at our large powers of 10, such as 10, 100, 1,000, and so on. And to divide by these large numbers of 10, these large powers of 10, we have, again, two steps. 1, count the number of zeros in the divisor. And 2, write the quotient by moving the decimal point in the dividend that number of places to the left. So we're going to look at our two examples here. On our first example, we have 0.0104 divided by 10. First thing I like to do when I'm working on these is I actually like to write them as fractions. They just seem a little bit easier to work with. So I'm going to go ahead and write my dividend divided by my divisor. Now remember, our first step tells us to count the number of zeros in the divisor. I have 1 0. Then our second step tells us to write the quotient by moving the decimal point in the dividend that number of places left. So since I have 1 0, I'm going to move my decimal 1 place to the left. Okay? The other way I like to look at this is I like to put a decimal behind our divisor. I want to make our denominator a 1. We'll see this more when we get into fractions. And I'm going to move it over 1 place to make it a 1, which is why I move it over 1 place in my numerator. So once we do that, we have 0.00104 as our answer. Again, we always like to have that leading 0. Okay, let's try it with our example 2. So we have 713.49 divided by 100. Again, I'm going to rewrite this as a fraction. And for those of us who were confused about those decimals and the fractions, I'm just going to follow the rules straight this time. So the first thing it tells us to do in step 1, count the number of zeros in the divisor. So there's 2 zeros here. The second step tells us to write the quotient by moving the decimal point in the dividend that number of places to the left. So here's our decimal. There's 2 places. So I'm going to move my decimal 2 places, which is going to leave me with the number 7.1349. So that way we don't have to worry about the numerator denominator nonsense. And our last special case of dividing by decimals is dividing by small powers of 10, such as 1/10, 1/100th, 1/1000th, and so on and so on and so on. So to do this, we have, again, still 2 steps. Step 1 tells us to count the number of decimal places in the divisor. Notice this time it's decimal places. And step 2, write the quotient by moving the decimal point in the dividend that number of places to the right. So we're doing very similar concept as when we were dividing with the larger numbers. So let's look at our first example. This time we have 713.49 divided by 0.001 or 1/1000. So our first step tells us to count the number of decimal places. So there's 1, 2, 3 decimal places in the divisor. Our second step tells us to write the quotient by moving the decimal point that many places to the right. So I'm going to move this decimal 1, 2, 3 to the right. I will have to add that extraneous 0 for a placeholder. And when I do, we end up with the number 713,490. And that is our answer. And let's move on to our last example here on our special cases. We have 23.738 divided by 0.1. Again, step 1 tells us to count the number of decimal places. I see 1. Step 2 tells us to move our decimal point that many places. I have 1 decimal place. I'm going to move it 1 to the right. So that's going to leave me with an answer of 237.38. And that's how we divide our special cases with small powers of 10. Now that we hopefully understand how to divide decimals, you try. So here's 5 practice problems that you guys get to try. Write them down, press pause, figure them out, and then press pause again to get the answers. Are these the answers that you got? Hopefully you got all 5 of these answers correct.